everyone, are you ready to be fired up? Because I sure am. Today I've got Robert Leonard here, and he is a young man who was just recently quit his full-time six-figure job to podcast full-time. So his podcast is number 63 in the world, and he's only been doing it for just, what'd you say, 15 months?
Yeah, just about 15 months.
15 months. Leonard, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Krista. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, thanks for being here. So talk to me. Tell me a little bit about first of all, what's your podcast called and who do you go after? Who's your target audience, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so I have a show. I technically have two shows. It's one main show, but we have two episodes that go out per week. On Mondays, we have a show called Real Estate 101, where we help newer investors get started in real estate investing. And the second show is called Millennial Investing, where we help people who are between 20 and 40 invest their time and money better. So typically that's in the stock market, but we also help with personal finance and entrepreneurship as well.
Great. What did you do before? What was your six-figure job? What did you do?
I was a corporate finance manager.
A corporate finance manager. You guys, if you're listening to this and not watching it, I mean, Robert looks like he could be my son. In fact, he could be my son because I'm almost 50 and he's 26. So he could actually be my son. And here he is, his podcast is making he has a multi-million-dollar business in podcasting from people advertising with him on his podcast. So tell us a little bit about that, Robert. I'm really interested in hearing your story.
Yeah, not to make you feel old, Krista. My dad is 51, I think, or 52.
Yep.
So it definitely does fit. In terms of the podcast, it was a crazy leap because, I have my MBA. I have a couple accounting licenses. So, I did the whole education route. I invested a lot in my career and, I worked really, really hard. I'm only 26, but still climbed the corporate ladder for 6-7 years as hard as I could to get to where I was. But on nights and weekends for about 15 months, I've been working every night and weekend to build the podcast. And finally, the corporate job, I knew I'd leave eventually, but I didn't think it would be this soon because I really enjoyed it. And then ultimately I was given an ultimatum at my corporate job that I either needed to focus on my career or podcast. And here's the decision. And I'm podcasting full time.
So why'd they give you that ultimatum? They wanted you to suck every ounce out of you, huh?
So it was actually an interesting situation. So I had worked a year-ish or so and no issues. Everybody that I reported to the CFO. The CFO that I work for had no problem with the podcast. Nobody else I knew had any issues with the podcast. CEO was fine with it. We actually talked about it. We were on a business trip to Dallas and I was sitting next to the CEO and he brought up the podcast. We were talking about it, how he's a real estate investor, and it was great. Everybody loved it. Fast forward a couple months, I ended up getting a new boss, a new CFO. There was a new CEO. And so the whole management team had just changed. I got called into my boss's office and she basically sat me down and said, "Hey, you're posting on LinkedIn during work hours and you can't be doing that." And I just said, "Oh boy." And so we got into this conversation. I said, "Well, with all due respect, that's not me actually posting it. I have some employees that work for me. So one, they're helping manage my social media for me. So one, it's not me. And two, there are software tools. Like we could schedule this 3 months in advance if we want to go out today at any time we want. So, I'm not actually working on my podcast during business hours." And so, ultimately it came down to optics and they felt it looked really bad for me to be posting on LinkedIn what appeared to be during work hours. And so I was given that ultimatum.
Okay. So here we are, 15 months later, now you're like in the top 63 podcasts in the world on business, which is just phenomenal. Tell us and I'm selfishly asking you for myself. So give us some marketing tips. How are you able to scale that so quickly?
So it's really just testing. And so I started working with, there was two guys, Stig and Preston. They started a podcast company called The Investors Podcast, and they have a very, very, very successful show themselves. And then what they wanted to do was leverage the brand to launch new shows. And so I got connected with them both. We ended up launching my show as like a test, and it did really well. And so that is definitely part of what gave the initial success. But they've launched 6 shows total, and 3 of them have failed. 3 have been successful. 2 of those 3 have been my team's shows. So it's not just like launching with this podcast company is going to make all the shows successful. My team has had a lot of really good ideas to help us grow. And some of those things are, working on the specific guests that you want. So, a lot of people think that you need to have the biggest name guests ever to really grow. And what I've actually found is the bigger the names of the guests, the lower downloads that I've actually received, which is totally opposite of what I expected. Like I've had Robert Kiyosaki on the show, Kevin O'Leary, Jesse Itzler, Lewis Howes, like some really big names, but those guys don't get as many downloads as some of these like really small other guests that I've had. And so we continued to test things like that, and it just has proven true time and time again. And so we test things like that. We test different titles. We found that titles are really, really important. And then really just trying to tailor the content to what people want to listen and look at the data. So if a certain topic does really well based on downloads, it's probably smart to do it again. And so we do that again and continue to see until the data tells us what's working and what's not. And, we started the first couple months, we got maybe 10,000 downloads, and, we're targeting 300,000 this month, or we should hit 300,000 this month. So we've definitely grown a lot. And I think a lot of the team's ideas are working really well.
Yeah. And so, okay, so say the name again of both podcasts, so people, because we have real estate agents, so they'll definitely be interested. The name of both of them again are what?
Yeah, one is Real Estate 101 and one is Millennial Investing.
Millennial investing. Okay, great. Wow, that's good for you. So when you say that you actually are monetizing this, and again, I'm just going really down and dirty here, and just asking you everything. What does that look like monetarily when you say that you're making money off of your podcast?
So we have, as a whole, the podcast company has about 16 or 17 full-time employees. And then I have 3 specifically on my team. And so primarily it's just monetized through ads. So we just got to deal with Audible and Capital One and, companies like that just pay a CPM, which is a revenue per 1,000 downloads, and they just advertise on the show. And so as the show scales, it becomes more profitable. And, there's great margins in that because we don't really have any cost of goods, really. It's just, putting out the content. So it's really, really scalable in terms of, that next 1,000 downloads doesn't cost any more for us to produce than the previous 1,000. So it's really scalable and profitable. And that's really the business model.
Wow. I know. Gosh, to be on Podcaster's Paradise, to be on John Lee Dumas's, my gosh, it's like outrageous what it costs to market on his. That was really good, valuable information, saying that the bigger the name, sometimes the smaller the downloads. I wonder why that is.
Well, I don't know for certain, but my thesis is that, let's just take Kevin O'Leary as an example. Everybody knows who Kevin O'Leary is, and he has millions of followers across social media. But the problem is when you interview Kevin, he's not going to go out there and share it. He's not going to go on his Instagram and share a picture of it. And yeah, maybe some people will find it from searching his name, but that's probably relatively small. Whereas you get a guy who has 20, 50, maybe even 100,000 followers on Twitter or Instagram that are super dedicated. They get tons of likes, comments, like a really good community. And they post a picture saying, hey, or a swipe up on their Instagram story that says, hey, go check out this episode. You get thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads right there. And then they like the episode, so they tell somebody else, and it just continues to grow. And that's what I've found to be the most successful in terms of growth, because, like I said, Kevin's just not going to share it.
Yeah, exactly. Gosh, I know I should have talked about my podcast, Fired Up with Krista Mashore, when I was just on your podcast, and I didn't do it. We definitely have to redo that one, Robert. I don't think I did very good anyways. I have that long hauler syndrome from COVID, so I'm still suffering from the effects of it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the craziest disease. Anyways, okay, so that's awesome to know about that. So you talk about investing. So basically, one of the things that he works on is helping young people, millennials, invest, which I think is, so I'm 49. I couldn't go on your podcast, wouldn't help me, huh, Robert?
No, it would. We actually, that's what it's called. And I almost didn't want to name it that because of that distinction. But I actually get comments from people all the time that say, hey, I'm not a millennial, but I still listen to the show and it really helps me. Or, I listen to this with my 2 millennial kids and, we all learn a ton. So those comments are actually really cool for me because, they're not necessarily millennials, but they're still really enjoying the show, which I like.
Yeah. Well, you're just trying to niche down. I mean, like, where we all know, right? The more you niche, the riches are in the niches. So you're just niching down and going after your ideal target audience, which totally makes sense. I understand. It's funny. I think niching just works so well because I teach it, I preach it, but for a while there, I was trying to actually kind of go after a broader audience, like local professionals. And it was just hard. It was just, when I was trying to go after, the many, it was like, it just so difficult. So we just strictly focus now on real estate and, realtors and lending. So I get it. Okay. So if you were, you've dealt with a lot of real estate agents and you're interviewing some of the best of the best. So tell us a few things. What are a few things that you notice that real estate agents are doing, the ones that are doing a lot of business? What are they doing?
I think, and you probably have the same thesis as me, and it's just content. I think that's the way that people need to do things nowadays. It doesn't matter if you're a real estate agent or if you're a different profession. I think content and just being a content creator is the way to do it. And I forget the name of the conference, but there's a conference that Gary Vee speaks at. I want to say it's Agents Live or something along those lines, where he talks about using content for agents. And there's just not many people doing it. I know some agents. I'm an investor, so I deal with agents all the time. And obviously for my personal residences, and they don't put out a lot of content. They're all just traditional agents that do the door knocking or the expired listings or the REO stuff, that all the stuff that works, but it's just really not scalable like you have with content creation.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. Like, you can't, when you're reaching the masses, I mean, you got to think about it. So when you're creating content on social media, especially if you're running paid ads and you're having hundreds of thousands of people in your community see you, like, they're literally, you can see how much watch time, and we're getting anywhere from 300, 500, 700 hours of watch time on every video that we produce. That is a lot. I mean, just one video does that. Imagine doing 2 or 3 a week, over and over and over again. It's a lot more effective than doing an open house, right? Or like, you can only dial so many times. There's just one of you that can show up to an open house, unless you have a team, but even then it's not you. When you create content and you properly distribute it so it's being seen by the masses, like, oh my gosh, right? Like, so much to be said about that. So what's some of the biggest mistakes that you're seeing agents make?
Agents and just entrepreneurs in general is a reliance on one source of deal flow. And so typically, you actually taught me this about Zillow just a few minutes ago when we were recording on my podcast. I didn't know that Zillow had removed some of the agent info on their site, but that fits in perfect to like what I help a lot of people with in terms of like social media and side hustles and building a brand, because a lot of these people are building businesses on the backs of Instagram, and then, they're getting their Instagram account shut down, and that's entirely all their deal flow. And the same thing happens for agents, right? I mean, if they were getting all their deal flow through Zillow and now they just took all their information off the site, like, what are you going to do now? And so just don't be so reliant on one source. And if you do content creation well or digital marketing well, you could be spread across a bunch of channels, and that'll save you from that reliance.
Oh, so true. So true. One of my mentors, Russell Brunson, he talks about how he used to, do Google AdWords, and let's just say a Google word was like 2 cents, for the word home seller, home buyer. And then all of a sudden that 2 cent word now is like $200, right? So it's like, imagine if he was just reliant on just Google AdWords, he'd be in big trouble. So getting yourself on multiple networks is really, really important as an agent. Okay. What do you think what is the hardest thing for agents? Like, what do you see across the country right now, besides low inventory? We all know that everyone has low inventory. We get it, right? But besides low inventory, what would you see are some of the big mistakes that agents are making?
It's not providing enough of a reason to pick you. Like, what is your reason as to why would I pick you over somebody else? I mean, the reality is, and I know agents do a lot more than just this, but the reality is today people can find most of the houses that they want right on Zillow or realtor.com, and then they need an agent to help show the house. Like, what are you doing that's going to differentiate you from any other agent that they could call to ask for a showing? And there's not a lot of people that are doing things to separate themselves in that case.
That is so well said. They're not doing things differently enough. So they're just like, they're swimming in a big red ocean of competitors. And everywhere you go, there's a real estate agent. Everywhere you go, there's a real estate agent that you can just touch, right? I've got 4 best friends that are in real estate that literally live more than that. Like, I'm thinking, more than that, right? That are living right here in my backyard. And they weren't, I didn't meet them in the industry. They were, they're my friends that became real estate agents, right? Because it just looks so easy. So it's so competitive. So you absolutely have to have a unique a unique value add. Okay, so let's kind of change the subject here. So investing. So talk to us a little bit about what's some of the advice that you give people for investing. I know it's obviously having multiple streams of income, but when you think about real estate investing, what kind of advice are you giving people?
The first piece of advice I give, and it's not always applicable to everybody, but, and especially if you've been a successful real estate agent, you probably wouldn't necessarily want to go this way. But for somebody just getting started, I think the best way to get started investing is house hacking. And for those who don't know, that's just buying a piece of property and renting out the additional space that you're not using in that property. So you could buy a single family house with 4 or 5 bedrooms, rent out the other bedrooms that you're not using. Maybe you want your own space. You buy a duplex, triplex, fourplex, and rent out the additional units that you're not living in. And that way you get practice. Essentially, it's not practice, it's very real, but you get to learn how to be a landlord by, right there.
Your thing turns green all of a sudden.
Yeah. So the cameras have a 30-minute max, but so you get to, it's like almost like a landlord light. Somebody told me once it was like landlord light, because you get to learn how to be a landlord without like it being its own property, and you get to reduce your living expenses and all kinds of great features and benefits that come with that. Now, if you don't want to live if you don't want to live in a duplex or triplex with, your neighbors right there, or share a single family house, the next best thing I recommend for new investors is to actually start small. And a lot of really big real estate gurus, think Grant Cardone and people like that. And I love Grant, but I don't necessarily agree with, his idea of always going super big right away. I think it's best for a new investor to actually start small with their first deal. And, a lot of people say they wish they had went right into apartment buildings, these 100 unit buildings first. And, I don't necessarily agree with that.
I mean, how do you have the money for that? Like not everyone just can be an investor. Like they need to come up with the money to be an investor.
So for big buildings or for the small ones, like I'm talking about?
Either or.
So the big ones, that's my biggest complaint, right? And you talk to people and they say, well, just, raise the money, syndicate it or find somebody that has the money that you could use. And yeah, that's definitely possible. Money right now is easy to come by for the most part, but you don't have the experience. And in my opinion, if you fail in something like that, you're digging yourself a really big hole that's hard to get out of. And even if you do get out of it, you just probably won't get out of it, and you will not be encouraged to continue in real estate. Whereas if you start with something small, the barrier to entry is a lot smaller because you don't need a ton of money. I bought my first rental with $15,000, which is not like a super small amount of money, but it's not a ton of money to get started in a rental property. And if, worst case scenario, if this thing failed, the total property was $75,000. Like it's not a huge hole. I'm not buying a multi-million-dollar property. And if it works, then I have all this encouragement and, motivation to continue to grow. And that's why I think new investors should start small.
And you're getting loans for these properties, and obviously not necessarily, because like in California, you can't get anything for $75,000. You can't even get a bathroom for $75,000. So obviously you have to buy out of state in maybe like Detroit or some of these other areas that are really, really affordable. Gosh, you can buy a house in Detroit for like 20 grand. It's insane. I mean, it's, the areas aren't the best, but it's still a rental.
Yeah. So I live in New Hampshire. I live about an hour outside of Boston. And we don't have a market that's quite as expensive as California, but it's still really expensive. The properties that I'm talking about is actually in Texas. I buy all my rentals long distance, and they're about 2,000 miles away. And it's the one I just bought last week was $72,500. It was 4-bed, 1.5 bath, beautiful area, great school district, garage, nice yard, everything. Where I live, that's probably a $500,000 house, $500,000 house. And so that's exactly why I went long distance, because one, you need 100 grand plus to get into that deal where I live. And two, the numbers just don't make nearly as much sense as a rental as they do down there. So I went long distance, and that's what I've continued to do.
So what's the area? I'm just writing this down because we have some money to invest, so we're going to be, so Robert, what's the exact city that you bought in over there?
So I buy in Wichita Falls in Texas. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours west of Dallas, Fort Worth. Mm-hmm. And it's about 120,000 people there.
And nice area from what you're saying.
Yes. I mean, there are bad areas, right? Every city has bad areas, but there are great neighborhoods.
Yeah. So talking like, what's the rent? What kind of rent are you bringing in? Are you getting loans for these places, or are you paying cash?
Yep. We're getting loans. So I do it with a business partner. My business partner, Ryan, and I, we're both 26, 27 years old. And so we just get on our first property, we did 20% down, typical. We needed $15,000 and we didn't take $1 from it. We both were pretty, made over six figures in our corporate career. So we didn't need the cash flow from the property. We were looking at a long-term play. So what we did was we just let the cash flow stay in the bank account for a year or two, and we never touched it. And we just bought a property last week, another one, and we used all the cash from that first property that the cash flow generated to buy the second one. And we did a little bit of renovations, a super, super light rehab. And so we bought it for $72,000. We put about $5,000 in rehab into it. It just appraised last week for $93,000. And so we'll do a full cash out refi, and we'll be into the deal for $0 with about $20,000 in equity. So we essentially bought both those properties for free. We essentially were given both those properties for free.
Yeah. And then what kind of rent are you getting from those?
So that first property we bought for $65,000 and it rents for $950 a month.
That's excellent.
And then the second property we bought it for $72,500 and it'll rent for about $1,100 to $1,200.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great return on investment.
Yeah, it does really, really well. And, a lot of people kind of poo-poo the single family space, but, we really like it. We get really, really good tenants because they're great family type houses. They can have we allow pets, so they get a pet or two. They get a really nice family feel, good schools. And, we get really good tenants that take care of the properties with strong rents. And yeah, it works really well for our niche.
Oh, good, man. It's really nice. If you're listening to this and you're young or old or in between, you're like me, or you've been in the business for a long time or a short time, you haven't done any rentals yet. Like, there are ways and there's options. You just might not be able to do the ones that are right in front of you. Right. So like buying an investment property, in my area would just be almost impossible unless you just had a lot of money and a lot of cash, especially with what's happening right now. So Robert, that was great. I really enjoyed talking to you today. It was awesome. So if you could leave everybody with one piece of advice, like just one piece of advice, whether it's real estate related or not, what would that advice be?
Probably just become a content creator, because even if you're an investor, people, or if you're an agent, I think it's obvious as to why that's beneficial. But if you're going to be an investor, you're thinking, why do I need content? Well, because then people will, again, just like as an agent, people will look to you as, a resource or somebody that knows what they're doing in terms of real estate. And, there's people in my life that I had no idea that had any money. And when they realized that I was a real estate investor, they came out of the woodworks. And, these people that you would never expect to have money tell you that they do because they see you posting on your social media about being a real estate investor. And so a lot of good opportunities come from creating content, whether you're an agent, investor, side hustler, entrepreneur, full-time employee, whatever it is. I would just say put out content.
You're speaking my language. I speak that all the time. So I guess it was great that you actually had the ultimatum to just either, do all in on your 9-to-5 corporate job or go all in podcasting. It looks like you made the right choice. So Robert, thank you so much for being here. I hope that you enjoyed yourself as much as we enjoyed having you. Everyone, don't forget, go check out Robert's podcast. We'll be sure to put in the show notes as well. I'm sure you'll get some listeners. We don't do anywhere near as good as you, Robert. We only get around 30,000 downloads a month. So hopefully we can still bring some love your way. If there's anything you'd like to leave for the audience, would you like to give them anything or talk about anything at all?
Yeah. So I really just, the best thing I can give away is send me a DM on Instagram. I will always answer all your questions. I think that's the best because, I could give away a resource, but generally those are going to be pretty high level. If you have any questions or specific things that you want to run by me, I answer every single DM that I get. I get a lot of them. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but I promise I will always get back to you. I'll help give as much guidance on your situation as I can.
And your handle is just Robert Leonard?
The Robert Leonard.
The Robert Leonard. Okay, guys, you heard it. He's going to answer your questions directly about investing in real estate, and I'm sure we'll be sending some listeners your way. Robert, thank you so much. And remember, everyone, it's great to be here and learn, but without implementation, nothing happens. So be sure to implement, and as always, make it a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, and don't forget, we've got our 2-day live event that comes up once a month. So just go to KristaMashore.com/2dayslive. That's KristaMashore.com/2dayslive, where you get 20 plus hours of coaching directly with me for only $97. And I'll see you there.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next podcast episode and new investing resources. What are your takeaways and thoughts about this discussion? Let us know in the comments section below.